Purdue's back in action on the West Coast trip. The Boilermakers return to gameplay on Tuesday night, which is tomorrow. For those of you listening to it, it's probably the day of the game. A little bit of a quick turnaround makes it a little nice coming back. They'll have an extra day, kind of on the turnaround coming back from the West Coast trip to get ready for Illinois. This is a UCLA team that has had a bit of a down year relative to expectations. Came into the season pretty lofty expectations. I think a lot of people, ourselves included, expected this team to kind of be like a top four team in the Big Ten. I mean, there were even people that were calling them a top three team in the Big Ten and saying they were better than Illinois. And they have not been that at all. And this is a team that you look back at a lot of this year, and quite frankly, they haven't beaten anybody good. They haven't beaten anybody inside the top 50 on KenPom. Their current best win is a 2-point win against Washington. Past that, you got to go down all the way down to Oregon and Arizona State. Just a team that hasn't beaten anybody really of decent caliber. And you look at a lot of losses. Like, this is a team, they were close to Arizona. It's a weird kind of profile. They played with intent to Gonzaga, played Arizona to 4 points, played Iowa fairly close, played Wisconsin close, but haven't won any of these games. What do you kind of make up of this matchup of UCLA? Like, is this a team that's kind of underperforming talent wise, or is this just not who we thought they were coming into the season?
I'd say it's a bit of both. When we did our preseason top 16s, I had UCLA on the outside looking in. I kind of suspected they might not be quite as good as what people thought they were, because they were a legitimate top 15 team coming in. I think most analysts, even myself included, figured they'd be, like you said, top 4 team in the Big Ten, probably a 4 or 5 seed at worst in the NCAA tournament. And right now they have an uphill battle just to make the tournament. This is not a team that is playing to the level of their talent, and it's also just a bad fit stylistically with this roster. They brought in Xavier Booker, formerly of Michigan State, to come in and play center. And Big Ten fans could have told you over the last 2 years he is not a starting caliber player in this league. I mean, he was out of the rotation for Michigan State last year down the stretch. And he's the guy they brought in to fix the problematic center spot from last year. Donovan Dent was such a fun, dynamic scoring guard, point guard, sort of combo guard who plays point at New Mexico for the last couple of years. And Mick Cronin has officially neutered him and ruined one of the most fun players in the entire country, as you were saying off air before we hit record. That's really disappointing to see. Hopefully he still has a few really fun games in him, and hopefully they don't come against Purdue.
Yeah, stock down Mick Cronin. What he did to Donovan Dent this year is gross. Free my dog, free Donovan. I love watching Donovan Dent last year, and it just Cronin. And I guess this is a good kind of segue into like what UCLA does as a team. Cronin just has forced this team that has a star point guard that likes to run and transition to play in the half court. Like, this is a team that plays slow. They're 300th in average tempo on an adjusted tempo on KenPom. This is going to feel like an Iowa style team. The difference, I think, between like an Iowa style team and a UCLA team is that a lot of what Donovan Dent likes to do is in transition. He's much less effective in the half court. He's not nearly as effective at getting downhill. Having to finish over multiple 7-footers doesn't go as well for a guy that's a little bit on the smaller side. He's only like 6'1". And so I think this kind of half court system has taken a lot away from what their best player wants to do. And that's a good sign to kind of a team coming in to play them, is that, you kind of have a coach and a star player battling each other. The one thing I would say is that he's arguably not their best player. Tyler Bilodeau has been pretty good this year, and he's going to be kind of an interesting cover for this Purdue front court. I think he's the one guy that I think is a really interesting matchup. You're going to have to see either Trey Kaufman-Renn, who has had some oddities, I think, in the last couple games, kind of have to have a pretty alert and pretty locked in, pretty intentional game, or you'll have to see one of the centers, whether it's Clough or Jacobson, kind of do good things on him in their minutes, because he's a guy that could get going behind the 3-point line in the way that some of the elite shooters in the country can.
Yeah, The UCLA front court is not good. We'll get into sort of the issues they have as a collective front court, but the guys they start in Bilodeau and Booker do present some interesting problems for Purdue in that both of them are 40% plus 3-point shooters. I mean, Bilodeau's damn near a 50, 40, 90 guy. He's excellent. He's on pace to make another all Big Ten team this year. He's averaging 19 points, 5.5 boards, and assists and a steal per game. He's good with the ball in his hands. He can drive to the rim. He can shoot it from deep. It's going to take a lot of defensive attention on him, I would say. The defensive game plan for Purdue is probably going to start with him and Dent and trying to contain those two guys and worry about guys like Sky Clark and Trent Perry and Alec Daly Jr. a little bit later. But yeah, Booker's going to be interesting cover too because he doesn't play a ton, but he does start, and Purdue fans will remember back when he was a freshman, like even though he's not that good, whenever you have a center that positionally is matching up with guys who pretty likes to play in drop coverage and play in the paint, who can stand at the 3-point line and bomb away from three, that presents some problems for the Purdue defense. Because even if you can stick a guy on Booker and kind of neutralize him, just his presence on the floor means that Clough or Trey Coppin-Wren or Daniel Jacobson or whoever you have on him is not in the paint protecting the rim. And Purdue already has enough problems defending the paint and defending 2-point range as it is with those guys staying around the basket. If Booker is just going to be on the floor and be a threat to fire away from three, they're going to have to play out towards him at least a little bit because he doesn't really do anything else when he's out there. And that's going to open up some lanes for Dent and maybe help him get into the paint a little bit more, which he's been struggling to do this year relative to when he was at New Mexico.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say about Booker is that the one thing he does do, which is not a whole lot on the basketball court, is he's more than happy to stand still on the 3-point line and put up the occasional 3-point attempt. I will say the one thing about Booker, I think Cronin has come to the same realization that Tom Izzo came to last year, and as much as I will talk down on how Mick Cronin has handled his rosters and certain talents over the last few years, he is making the right decision in doing this, but Xavier Booker is kind of just getting benched right now. He hasn't played more than 16 minutes since December 13th. In that stretch, he has more games of 0 points than he does games of multiple shots made from the field. It's a guy that in that stretch hasn't rebounded whatsoever. He has one game in that stretch with more than one rebound. That was a game against Penn State in which he had 0 points and 4 rebounds in 12 minutes. So this is a starting center that in his current state is a, for lack of a better word, hole. It literally just, it's like playing 4-on-5 when he's out there right now for UCLA, and they're turning to Steven Jamerson, even though kind of Booker's gotten the start. Jamerson's starting to get the majority of the minutes, and he's another one of those guys that it's like there's just not a whole lot there, and this leads to a front court of those two in Bilodeau that really hasn't been good rebounding. They're 265th nationally in defensive rebounding percentage, 154th nationally in offensive rebounding percentage, and I think that's where it starts and ends for Purdue in this game is just on the glass. You should have an otherworldly rebounding advantage, kind of akin to how you expect some of those higher rated teams to have rebounding advantages over like a 14 seed in the NCAA tournament. Like that's kind of the level of rebounding that UCLA has, especially with their front court. And that's where Purdue needs to make their money. And that's kind of where you need to live on the road. And the Big Ten is doing things like that to kind of get a garbage man win.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting challenge for Purdue defensively, I think, because as much as UCLA struggles to rebound offensively, they're a good shooting team. Now, Donovan Dent and Eric Daly Jr., two of their highest usage players, are not good shooters. But Tyler Bilodeau, Sky Clark, and Trent Perry are all over 40% from three, as is Xavier Booker, like we mentioned, though. He doesn't take many of those shots. And Jamar Brown is sitting at 38% from three, and he's one of their primary bench guards. So they have guys who can shoot from three. And as we discussed on this program before, Purdue's defensive game plan is to allow UCLA or whoever they're playing to shoot some threes in exchange for getting better help in the paint and making it a little tougher to score around the rim. And UCLA is just going to be a tough team to do that against, I think. Now, they can sag off Donovan Dent. They can sag off Eric Daly Jr., but both of those guys are capable shooters. Those are guys who have made threes in the past. It's a little bit like the conversations we've had. I know there was frustration from a lot of Purdue fans after the Iowa game where it felt like Iowa's Iowa's players who just never shot the ball at all were making a lot of threes. If you try and play off of Daly and Dent, they can hurt you. They're just not going to be making a ton of contested, difficult, off the dribble catch and shoot with a hand in your face type threes. So
Yeah.
this is maybe a team that's going to be a little bit more difficult for Purdue to just let role players take shots because most of their role players are good shooters. On the other hand, they do struggle a little bit more in the paint outside of Bilodeau, and maybe that's an advantage where Purdue give up a little bit more in the paint as much as they've struggled there recently. Live with that instead of bombing away from three.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Daly and Dent as the two guys, the two non-shooters. Like, respectfully for both of those guys, Daly was 38% on 3 attempts a game last year, and Donovan Dent was 40% on 2 attempts per game last year. Like, these guys have been good shooters in the past, and as much as they're having down years, that almost means, they're due for positive regression. So, like, this almost feels like one of those, like an exact script of one of those guys that one of those two is going to come in and hit 3 or 4 threes, and Purdue fans are going to cry on Twitter about, well, so and so guy, is a horrible shooter, and he hit 4 threes against us. Well, you're just looking at low volume sample size for this year. Like a guy like Donovan Dent, if he did hit 3 or 4 threes in a game, would that shock you? Like, no, it wouldn't, because he's a good basketball player and has had stretches of his career where he's been a really good shooter. And if Purdue is giving up looks as good as they gave up to some of the guys on Iowa, for example, expect a lot of those to go in. Now, the good news is of those 5 starters, Dent and Daly are really the only two that are much of a threat at getting to the rim, I think. Um, Trent Perry's kind of turned out to be a pretty solid player for them. I really like what he's done for them, but I think it's a guy that, like you say, if Braden Smith is matched up with Trent Perry, and that's kind of what I expect the matchup to be, I don't expect him to like get whatever he wants getting to the basket. It's not a guy that's like known for his isolation scoring. He's more of a shooter. And Jamar Brown is almost entirely a shooter. That's a guy that he's taken 47 threes on the year, 29 twos. Like, yeah, his efficiencies are absurd, which I don't know if you how much you clicked around on his profile. He's currently at 69% from 2 point range, 38% from three, and perfect 14 to 14 from the line. Like, this is a very efficient basketball player, but that's a shooter. That's a guy that doesn't really want to get downhill and get to the rim. And I think, kind of UCLA only having one of those guys really plays into Purdue's defensive hand, where they really want to stop one elite perimeter guy with their elite perimeter defender in CJ Cox. And the matchups kind of play perfectly into that.
Yeah. UCLA is a good shooting team. They're a highly efficient shooting team. And it's going to be interesting to see how Purdue guards them, like we talked about. You mentioned Daly and Dent not being super efficient 3-point shooters this year, but historically they have been, and really any of them could go off at any time. And Bilodeau specifically is going to be an interesting guard for Purdue because he's one of the more dynamic offensive players in the Big Ten, and he can score in a lot of different ways. I expect Trey Kaufman-Renn probably gets the initial assignment on him, but that's one that Purdue might have to throw some different bodies at him and try some different things if Trey's having another off night like he has the past couple of games, or even if he's having a decent game, if Bilodeau's just getting his like he's liable to do against anyone, if Purdue might have to throw some different looks at him and maybe double him and force the ball out of his hands a little bit.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how UCLA attacks this defense. This isn't a team that has really had a ton of success at creating a lot of looks like right at the rim. They're one of the worst teams in the country at average 2 point distance. They like to take a lot of tough twos, and I think it'll be really interesting to see if they attempt to post up Purdue. I'm not sure they will, because I think they're going to really struggle inside. And I think that's kind of a good segue into what Purdue's going to want to do offensively, because this is a UCLA defense that I think that they can get some of what they want at the rim. This is a UCLA defense that's 216th nationally in 2 point percentage. For a Purdue offense that hasn't been clicking great over the last couple games, I would say, especially that USC game really was not a pretty offensive night at all. This is the perfect opportunity to kind of get right, I would say. Like this, like especially for a guy like Trey Kaufman-Renn, who has struggled efficiency-wise over the last couple games. This is the perfect opportunity for him to get some easy looks around the rim without really the threat of a shot blocker or really a plus interior defender at all. With between Jamerson, Bilodeau, and Booker, none of the three are really plus interior defenders.
Yeah, this is a UCLA team that has a decent block percentage, but you're right. Like their interior defense is not great. However, this is a great defense at forcing turnovers, and they defend the three extremely well. So this is a game where I think Purdue's going to have to play inside out. This is one they're probably going to be forced to. It's what UCLA is going to want them to do. They're going to be applying a lot of ball pressure to Braden and CJ and the other ball handlers. Omer when he gets in the game, they're going to be trying to take away threes. They're probably going to be running guys aggressively off the 3-point line, especially Fletcher Lawyer. Like this is probably not a game where Fletcher's going to get a ton of great looks unless he's attacking closeouts well, which he can do. So that might be a way he can get involved offensively. But Clough and Kaufman-Renn are going to have their work cut out for them in this game. And by that, I mean, they're probably going to handle a large offensive load. Like just a lot of shot volume for those two guys. I expect them to try and get Jacobson involved when he's in the game on some lob attempts. Just generally, as much as they can, try and attack the rim because that's where UCLA is vulnerable. And Purdue hasn't done a great job of getting their bigs involved outside of Clough the last couple of games. Like this is a game, we've said this the last several about Trey Kaufman-Renn. As much as he's really struggling and seems to be out of it mentally, like this is a great matchup for him. It's a great matchup for Clough. Even if Trey doesn't have it again, just go inside to Clough and see what he can do.
Yeah, I would say I think the one good sign or kind of you know thing that might not help UCLA's pressure is their kind of most havoc-inducing defender, in my opinion, and Sky Clark is out. At least he has been since the Iowa game on January 3rd. This is a guy who's their best perimeter defender, in my opinion, kind of the best steals guy on the team. They do a pretty good job of forcing live ball steal turnovers, and he was a big reason for that. And he's been sidelined for almost a month now with a hamstring injury. And so him being out, I mean, we haven't really talked about him at all name wise. Him being out kind of changes this UCLA team's perimeter defense. It now kind of opens things up to where you're starting Dent, Perry, and Jamar Brown, and that's a much more gettable defensive lineup of three guys that I don't think is quite as capable of putting on the defensive pressure that they were able to before when they had like a Sky Clark starting for them.
Yeah, just was trying to look up and see if they've released any info on Sky Clark for tomorrow or today is when the time you see this game against Purdue. It doesn't look like they have. I would expect
KenPom has his game numbers highlighted in red, which I believe means that he's done for the season.
That's not what I'm seeing. From the little research I did, and apologies for not researching this better before we clicked record. It looks like they're expecting him to come back. The way Mick Cronin was talking, it didn't sound like it's a super serious hamstring injury, but as any sports fan knows, hamstring injuries, soft tissue injuries in general, but hamstring injuries especially can be super touchy. And if you try and come back too soon from one of those, you can end up with a much more serious injury. So I would expect them, if Sky Clark is not back in this game, you're right. Like they lose their best perimeter defender. Dent is a good defender. Daly is a good defender, but they're not quite the havoc-inducing steals guys like you talked about with Sky Clark. So that could be an advantage for Purdue. And if they're not able to force Braden into as many mistakes, like they're still going to guard the perimeter tightly, but it might be a little bit easier for him to get guys like Trey Kaufman-Renn and Oscar Clough and DL Jacobson involved.
Yeah, I think regardless of whether or not Sky Clark is available, I don't think that changes what you've been talking about. Like this is still a game that I think Purdue should and will have a lot of success playing through the bigs. And that's kind of why I'm so excited for Trey Kaufman-Renn. Like I think this is a game you could potentially see a couple of like Jack Benner, Trey Kaufman-Renn at the 4-5 lineups and get a little creative because there's going to be it's not going to be uncommon for UCLA to go 4-5 with Daly and Bilodeau. In fact, that's actually their most common lineup. Like their most common lineup is Dent, Perry, Jamar Brown, Eric Daly, and Tyler Bilodeau. They play that lineup around 10% of the time. That's not a very big lineup, and that's not a lineup that you feel super uncomfortable about playing Trey Kaufman at the five and Jack Benner at the four. And in doing that, I think you give Trey Kaufman quite a bit of room to work and operate and go one on one with guys that he should be able to score kind of at will against. And my hope is that a scoring game where he has 20 and is able to kind of feature himself as this scorer is able to kind of help him get out of this kind of seemingly mental funk and kind of help him, just settle down. Like you're still the All-American guy. Like you're still this awesome player, and we still need you to be an awesome player for this team to be special. And getting Trey Kaufman-Renn back to like the high functioning A+ value player that he could be is paramount for this team, in my opinion.
Purdue should have a size advantage in this game pretty considerably, especially in the front court. And so it'll be interesting to see if they really lean into that, play Oscar Clough and Daniel Jacobson a ton, or if they say, you know what, let's sacrifice some of that size advantage because we know we can still win the rebounding battle, even if those guys aren't on the floor for 40 minutes, and get more shooting out there and play Benter more, play him next to Trey and Oscar, and maybe we see a little bit less Jacobson, like what happened against USC. Probably depends on how everyone's playing. And, if Trey's going off, we're not going to take him off the floor. If he's struggling, maybe you don't want to put him out there more, and Jacobson's rim protection becomes more important. So we'll see how they decide to play that. But I think there's multiple lineups where Purdue will have a pretty sizable advantage in the front court, and it'll be interesting to see how Painter decides to handle those rotations.
Yeah, and I think that kind of is a good segue into predictions. Now that we've gotten both the offensive and the defensive matchups, KenPom currently has this game projected as a 77-71 win for Purdue. KenPom has the Boilers moving on to 18-1 and 8-0 in the conference. Do you think that's happening? And if so, do you think they cover the spread? Do you think they cover the 6 points?
6 sounds about right to me. I know UCLA has had an underwhelming season. I still think this is a team that's maybe a little bit better than their record, at least in conference play. They have a lot of talent on this roster, and Purdue's played worse teams about this close over their last 4 or 5 games. I'd say this is a team very close to Iowa in caliber. I think Iowa's definitely better, but I think they're a little close to Iowa than like a Washington or even like a USC, definitely a Penn State. So give me Purdue. I'll guess the score is a little bit higher. I think both offenses will get going a little bit because they can attack each other in different ways. So give me Purdue. I'll say 81-76.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be another close game on the West Coast trip. We haven't really talked about the USC game a whole lot. Just some scheduling conflicts came up, and then by the time we got around to recording this, got so close to the UCLA game, little difficult time wise. But yeah, I'm sure we'll touch on that game at some point. But coming off of a really tight USC game, Braden's a little banged up. It sounds like that's not going to change for this game at least. This is a really interesting matchup. I know you mentioned Iowa. Stylistically, this team plays a lot like Iowa. I think the difference is that Iowa was able to hang inside. They were able to hang on the glass. And even though Purdue hasn't been rebounding quite on the same level that they were initially at the beginning of this season, and a large part of that is kind of Trey Kaufman-Renn not rebounding at quite the same level he had been earlier, I don't think this UCLA team can hang on the glass. I think like the rebound advantage gets to like 12, 15 boards just off of like Clough is going to have a field day on the glass. Clough is going to get whatever he wants. Wouldn't shock me to see him at like 13, 14 rebounds. Like this is a game that it wouldn't shock me to see Jacobson at like 6 or 7 rebounds in 15 minutes because he's just going to be way bigger than everybody else. And I think when that happens, this Purdue team gets really, really dangerous because the defensive concerns kind of go downward a little bit while simultaneously making this offense just even more unstoppable because you can't give this offense a second look or a second chance at a possession. And I think it leads to some high scoring offense for Purdue. I think the possessions are low. Purdue's super efficient. I think this is a like 82-73 win for Purdue. Cover the 6 points slightly, but move to 18-1 and kind of cement themselves as the team to beat in the Big Ten with the Big Ten conference race starting to heat up. Yeah, I feel like that about does it for UCLA. It's a lot of words for a Mick Cronin led team, but they have some real talent and provide some real kind of unique things that they do. And at the end of the day, one off games can be one off games, and any team can win any basketball game. So I'm sure most Purdue fans know that. And we'll be watching tomorrow night on Tuesday night as well as you guys all will be. So be sure to tune in for the recap after. And as always, thanks for listening.